I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is fighting for our limitations. When we fight for our limitations, we get to keep them. And yet, so many of us defend the foundational concepts that perpetuate our suffering. So we get to look at this phenomena and maybe get some perspective on it. But before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant bright light, lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So good to be with you this morning. Limitations. So it's really interesting to me to look at some of my clients and also myself in the past in the midst of depression or despair, the resistance to moving out of that space, to be miring ourselves more deeply in those spaces in a pretty deliberate and conscious way. Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to have you here with us this morning. We're talking about fighting for our limitations and how when you fight for your limitations, you get to keep them. So when we tell ourselves, I can't do this because of that, when we find all kinds of justifications for things, and things remaining the way they are, as unacceptable as they may be, then we do get to keep that limitation. So I was talking to someone about they were wanting to launch a project, and they had a multitude of reasons why this project wouldn't work, why it wouldn't be launched, why it couldn't be launched, and or why if it were launched it would fail. And the longer I'm at this work, the more clear it is to me how directly we create our reality and how directly we create our experience of reality. And so when we define, I can't do it because of this, and this, these external circumstances that are prohibitive, we are ascribing reality to those circumstances. Now, it doesn't mean that there isn't some truth to those circumstances. It doesn't mean that there might not be some constraints within which or that need to be addressed, need to be considered, but by accepting those limitations, what we're doing in certain ways is absolving ourselves of the effort, maybe, or absolving ourselves of the responsibility to take the steps. So yesterday we were talking about power. And one of the ways that we abdicate our power is by generating excuses. And it's not that those excuses couldn't be validated and justified. Oftentimes they can be, like, I can't do that because I'm too old. Like, I can't go back to school, for example, because I'm too old. Or I can't do that because the audience isn't right for that right now. The times are such that what I have to say isn't something that people want to hear. There are all kinds of ways that we mitigate our power, that we mitigate our desires also, or we justify that mitigation. And I'm too this, I'm too that, I'm not enough this, I'm not enough that, and or the world is this way, or people are that way. And we make all these pronouncements about the nature of reality, when in fact what we're making pronouncements about is the nature of our reality and the reality that we're projecting. Because I know a lot of people who live in a world where people are terrible. And I don't really live in that world. I see cultural trends that are baffling to me, but my experience is that I have experience with remarkable people who are trying to make a change, who are trying to make a difference, who are blazing trails. So, like, I don't think that that's a function of me being special in any way. I think it's a function of the lens through which I perceive the world. And, this makes me think about someone else I was speaking with who was feeling very disenchanted and kind of at the effect of some people's behavior. And one of the things that I think is so important is to be willing to know what we know. So I guess it could seem like it's a little bit of a tightrope, because on the one hand, you can say, well, the current conditions, or the marketplace wants this, that, or the other thing. We could be talking about that as realities. And if we recognize that that may be true, then we might come up with different strategies to access that marketplace, for example. But many of us who are very well-meaning healer type people, or people who are more spiritually oriented, oftentimes just really want to see the best in people and to be relating to that aspect of the person that is that brilliant inner diamond, because I believe that we all have that. However, we often do that while denying the way that that person is presenting in the world, the realities of their expression. We often make excuses for people's bad behavior rather than recognizing and acknowledging that that's actually a part of the equation. That's a part of the equation that needs to be identified if we're going to have an accurate assessment of something. So be willing to know what you know, be willing to see what you see. And so, yes, okay, it's a tough market, all these things. And what am I making that mean to me? What am I making it to mean to me that there are all these obstacles? Am I allowing that to be something that says, okay, well, I'm not going to follow my dream? Or am I saying, well, I guess I have to find a really creative approach to this. I'll have to find another strategy that will allow me to access the audience that I know is there for this. It's just I don't necessarily know how to find them. Or what I'm reminded of is my cousin's house hunting years ago. And he had been looking for a really long time, was very frustrated, was very overwhelmed, sort of downtrodden around the whole thing. And he said, well, the market is really bad right now. There aren't a lot of houses on the market. They're really expensive. And all these observations about the way things are or were. And then from that, there was the underlying conversation of, because circumstances are that way, I'm not going to be able to find the house that I want. So that was the underlying conversation, is I can't have what I want. And I hear all the reasons. And then we sat down and we just wrote out a list of everything that they wanted in a house, including the price range, all the features of the house that they wanted. And we put that list together. And of course, he didn't really believe that, anything was going to come of that. So he wasn't attached to the list. But it was what he really wanted. Like he connected to that. Like that would be what he really would enjoy. And then the house showed up in his price range with all the features that he wanted. And to this day, years later, he's still mystified by the magic of that. But what happened was that he didn't allow himself to, or he had a moment where he allowed himself to extricate himself from the whole story of the limitations. And when we step outside of those limitations, those limiting stories, we enter a different dimension of potential and possibility. It was so interesting over the weekend. I mentioned yesterday when I was talking about power, I went to this workshop and we were exploring power and what it means and what its nature is, etc. And I just lost my train of thought. It'll come back. Sometimes the train leaves the station and I'm just not on board. It happens. Oh, I know what it was. So we were talking about how different levels of consciousness allow us access to different opportunities or different ways of thinking. So, and this is so true. And what we were talking about is making change, and how shifting our beingness is foundational, at least this is my perspective, is foundational to be able to make meaningful change. And one of the things that we need to do in shifting that beingness is start looking for the unexamined assumptions of our culture that probably are lacking in accuracy. So for just an example, that's sort of a stark example, but in a culture that believes war is necessary, war is a solution to things, right? But what about that underlying assumption that war is essential to culture, like that war has to exist? What if we questioned that? What if we looked at, well, what would it be like to have a culture where war didn't need to exist? So if I believe, going along this war conversation, if I believe that it's a dangerous world and everybody's out to get me, and I have to defend myself, and it's based in a notion of separation, and if I have, if you have more, I have less. If we operate on those assumptions or those suppositions, the options for conflict resolution are going to be very different than if my experience, if I'm coming from a place of oneness. The whole notion of oneness is going to allow me to generate alternative approaches that would not be accessible to me if I believe that everybody is out for themselves and it's a dog eat dog world and we have to defend what's ours. So approaching change and transformation, in my from my vantage point, my current hypothesis is that to make meaningful change, we need to make meaningful change in the way that we be, the way that we interact with the world, the foundational suppositions that we have about our being here. And the foundational premise of the cultures that I'm aware of, mostly, other than perhaps in indigenous peoples, is based in a paradigm of separation. And as long as we are founded in a paradigm of separation, we have a whole bunch of outcroppings of that, largely relating to patriarchal domination and control, and we can go on and on about all that. The thing is that when we fighting for our limitations, one of the ways that we do that is by saying, that's just the way it is, I can't do anything about it. And I guess the wisdom prayer pops into my head. God, grant me the serenity to accept those things I cannot change, courage to change those things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. And I guess I get to question, well, what can we not change? You know, what, maybe there are many more things that we can change than we realize. And access to how to make that change comes about as we transform ourselves. So if I am living in fear, And I can give all kinds of reasons to be fearful. The kinds of determinations and decisions and options that are available to me, let alone that I might consider, are very, very different than the kinds of opportunities and potentials that might present themselves to me from a different vantage point. This is a really profound thing to recognize, I think, that where we're coming from is dictating what's available to us. It's kind of like the false choices that we have, you know, the limited options that we have about certain things that we then perceive as choice. It's like chocolate or vanilla, choose. You want chocolate, you want vanilla. I want butter pecan praline. You know, that wasn't on the menu, and because it wasn't on the menu, we didn't entertain that as an option. And that's the thing, is we start to, I think we get to be ordering off the menu. That's where the potential for our future is going off the menu to start generating new options. When we recognize, oh, I'm not constrained by the menu, a whole new world opens up. And this is the case with our consensus reality, where we buy into this is how it is. And it is very much like The Emperor Has No Clothes, the story where the emperor's running around in his underwear, having been convinced by his tailors that this new outfit that he's wearing is just made of gossamer thread. And a little kid says, hey, the emperor's got no clothes. Because the kid isn't prey to that consensus reality. The kid is still seeing with and maybe an unconditioned lens. And so maybe we get to decondition ourselves a bit. I'm saying maybe kind of sarcastically, like, yeah, we get to decondition ourselves. That's where our hope lies. That's where the hope is. Because looking at the system from the way the system currently exists, there's no way out. There's no solution that the system itself is generating for curing itself, for correcting itself. And so many of us fight for these limitations of ideas, this polarizing concept of right and wrong, well, black and white, I'm right, you're wrong, kind of, or you're right, I'm wrong, kind of dynamic that keeps us locked into the suffering, keeps us fighting for our limitations, and keeps those limitations in place. And so what we need to do is to find a way to first recognize these unexamined assumptions. Like, another unexamined assumption in our culture is that suffering has merit. Look at it. You know, like, we'll admire someone who has suffered so deeply. and we will bear our burden with dignity, right? And part of the thing with that is that we don't necessarily conceive of putting down the burden, which can be done in multitudes of ways, even just in being, even just in the way we perceive this thing that we're carrying. By defining it as a burden, we're creating the experience of suffering, right? Because we are burdened. So a shift of being can allow us a very different experience. Dido, welcome, welcome. So Dido says, such as the impoverished artist idea. Exactly. I'm a starving artist. I wanted to be an artist personally. And I had this whole idea of the starving artist. And I know people who are brilliant artists who have this idea of the starving artist. But there are successful artists. And there are ways to be successful. Like the idea almost has a we've elevated it so that the suffering of the artist, that's kind of an essential thing for them to be qualified as an artist. It's kind of a strange equation if you think about it. People who are making something that beautifies or illuminates the world in some way or another, that they should be impoverished or that they should suffer or that they should starve. It's kind of a crazy idea, right? And a limitation, and it makes a lot of people divert their dream because that's the fate they think they're going to be stepping into. And Dido says, or musician. Exactly. Well, we know that there's some very, very, very successful musicians. And there are lots of musicians who work at Starbucks and wait tables to try to make ends meet. But it's who we are and what we're taking into it in many ways. And we can say, okay, the system is certain, we can recognize this is how the system is. And given that, how do I transcend it? How do I move beyond that system? How do I create new potentials? It's a space of being and intentionality. I'm not talking about denial. I'm just talking about being present and thinking beyond the convention. And that's really what we need to do. We need to release our limitations. When we fight for them, we get to keep them. And that's it for this morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to please like and follow EWN, Facebook and YouTube, and mine as well. And the links are in the description. It is such a pleasure, as always, and a privilege to be sharing together in these musings about what it is to be human. So until next time, so much love to you.